Did you know that, for the first time in history, an unprecedented wave of people is turning away from traditional burial practices and instead embracing cremation as their final journey? Experts are sounding the alarm, predicting that this rapidly growing trend will continue to skyrocket, with a shocking 70% of the population expected to choose cremation over burial within the next decade. But this raises a critical and potentially life-altering question: should Christians follow this path? What are the hidden spiritual risks and consequences of such a decision? In this video, we're going to unravel these deeply troubling questions. We'll explore 4 key questions that cannot be ignored. First, what exactly is cremation? It may seem like a straightforward process, but the implications run far deeper. Second, we'll delve into what the Bible really says or doesn't say about cremation. Is there hidden wisdom in the scriptures that might shed light on this modern practice? Third, there's the disturbing question that haunts many believers: could cremation interfere with God's divine plan for our resurrected and glorified bodies when the rapture comes? And finally, if you're a Christian considering cremation, what weighty and profound factors must you reflect upon before making this irreversible choice? Before we get into answering these important questions, I would greatly appreciate your support. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this valuable content with others. Let's begin with the first question: what exactly is cremation? Cremation is much more than just an alternative to burial. It's a process that transforms the body in an intense and irreversible way. The body is subjected to extreme heat, reducing it to its most basic elements: bones and ash. The soft tissues are completely vaporized in the flames, leaving behind only charred bone fragments. These fragments are then pulverized into a fine powder ashes that are the final remnants of a once living being. But this physical transformation is only one part of the equation. What about the spiritual transformation? What does this act of turning a body into ash mean in the grander spiritual context? Now, let's turn to the biblical perspective. Genesis states, "By the sweat of your face you will eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." This passage emphasizes the idea that we are made from dust, and through cremation, we seemingly return to that state. But the journey of the body through the fire and its ultimate reduction to ashes raises haunting spiritual questions that resonate far beyond the physical process. Is cremation truly just a return to dust, or is there something more profound, something deeply spiritual at stake? According to data from the North American Cremation Association, the number of people opting for cremation has skyrocketed in recent years, driven by factors like economic hardships, shifting societal norms, and environmental concerns. More than half of Americans now choose cremation, and this movement shows no signs of slowing down. Scientifically, it's presented as an eco-friendly option that saves space and avoids the harmful chemicals used in embalming. But here's the harsh truth: cremation consumes significant energy, and the environmental trade-offs are far from clear-cut. And beyond the environmental impact, the moral and spiritual implications of this decision should make every Christian pause and reflect deeply. What are we truly choosing when we opt for cremation? Now, let's confront the second question: what does the Bible say about cremation, if anything at all? This is where things get even more concerning. Throughout the Old Testament, death is mentioned more than 200 times, and in every instance, burial is the method used to handle the body. Yet the Bible never explicitly states that burial is the only acceptable way to treat the dead. There are accounts of bodies being burned, but no clear directive regarding cremation as we understand it today. Does this silence indicate divine approval, or are we missing a deeper message? One chilling example is the story of Saul and his sons, who were defeated in battle by the Philistines. When their bodies were discovered, the Bible recounts, all the valiant warriors traveled by night to Bethshan and took the bodies of Saul and his sons down from the wall. They brought them to Jabesh, burned the bodies, and buried the bones under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh. Then they fasted 7 days. This eerie account leaves us with a haunting question: is cremation simply another option, or does it carry spiritual consequences that we have yet to fully understand? So what most likely happened here was that those bodies were in a state, perhaps mutilated or simply in such a destroyed state, that a proper traditional burial or transporting those bodies back to a place where they could be buried was simply not practical. So they decided to burn the bodies. Another reference to bodies being burned but not necessarily cremation is found in 2 Kings 21, which says the following: Manasseh also sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced sorcery and divination, and consulted mediums and psychics. And then finally in 2 Kings 2, 3, 6, and 20 it says the following: Then Josiah turned and noticed several tombs on the hillside. He ordered that the bones be brought out and burned them on the altar at Bethel to defile it. And then in verse 20 it says the following: He executed the priests of the pagan shrines on their own altars and burned human bones on the altars to defile them. Again, these are references to bodies being burned, but without direct reference or statement to the process or concept of cremating or having someone cremated at the time of death. In the narrative of the events described in 2 Kings 23 verse 6 and 20, King Josiah's action reflects a time of intense religious reforms in the kingdom of Judah. This moment in biblical history, full of symbolism and meaning, illuminates the complexity of funeral practices and their role within the cultural and spiritual context of the time. Josiah, in his determination to purify worship and restore strict adherence to the precepts of the Torah, undertook a vigorous campaign against pagan worship places. The act of burning human bones on the altars at Bethel was not just a demonstration of religious disapproval, but an attempt to eradicate any vestige of practices considered abominable. Although this act is not directly related to cremation as a chosen funeral practice or as a ritual itself, it highlights the manipulation of mortal remains in religious contexts and the powerful symbolism of fire and purification and desecration. Scientifically, cremation involves processes that have been studied both in terms of ethics and environmental impact. Researchers in the fields of archaeology and anthropology have explored how different cultures throughout history have treated their dead and what methods of cremation were used. These studies reveal a variety of practices, from simple pyres, from outdoor pyres to modern cremation facilities that minimize the emission of harmful gases. The biblical perspective views the handling of bones and mortal remains as having deep spiritual implications. In Numbers 19:11, for example, it is stated that anyone who touches a person who has died and been buried will be unclean for 7 days. This verse underscores the view of death as something that imposes a ritual separation requiring purification. However, cremation as a practice of handling the dead is not directly mentioned in the Bible, leaving room for interpretations and adaptations within Christian principles. Interestingly, modern science offers a new perspective on cremation, especially in relation to environmental conservation. Comparative environmental studies between traditional burials and cremation highlight how the latter can be considered a more sustainable alternative, reducing the ecological footprint associated with the use of land for cemeteries and the decomposition of bodies that release methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Therefore, the narrative around cremation, intertwined with biblical reflections and scientific insights, transcends the simple disposition of mortal remains and touches on fundamental issues about purity, memory, identity, and spiritual continuity. In the contemporary context, the choice between burial and cremation is influenced by a matrix of factors, including religious beliefs, environmental considerations, and personal desires. Thus, the dialogue between faith and science continues to shape funeral practices, reflecting both respect for tradition and adaptation to the demands of the modern world. Now let's move on to the third question, which many people ask. How does this affect my resurrected body? How does this affect the body I will have when God gives me a body at the rapture? And what will happen with all this? Well, let's read what the Bible says about our glorified bodies in 1 Corinthians 15. It states here that just as with the resurrection of the dead, our earthly bodies are planted in the ground when we die, but they will be raised to live forever. Our bodies are buried in humiliation, but will be raised in glory. They are buried in weakness, but will be raised in strength. They are buried as natural human bodies, but will be raised as spiritual bodies. For just as there are natural bodies, there are also spiritual bodies. So people have asked this question, and I get this question a lot. How is God going to put my body back together if I decide to be cremated? Well, let me just remind you that God used earth and dust at the beginning to create humanity. So if God used earth and dust to create man, don't you think God is powerful enough to use dust or ashes to recreate your body? That's the first thing. But the second thing is when you think about the fact that there are all sorts of ways that people's bodies can be destroyed, could be eaten by a lion or a shark in the ocean, could be blown up in war, or could be burned, right? So God is not limited by any of these things in terms of the way our bodies were discarded. He is not limited in his ability to be able to recreate a body that we will have for eternity. But the most important thing to understand is this, depending on how long on thick. No matter how long a person has been dead, all of us at some point, depending on the time, all our bodies will decompose into ashes. If you look at science, you'll see that it takes time for soft tissue to decompose. Sometimes it can take longer than that. It can take months to years for our entire body to be completely decomposed to the point where only a skeleton remains. This is called skeletonization, I believe. And then it can take decades or even centuries for our skeleton to completely decompose into dust, depending on the soil in which the coffin was placed, the quality of the coffin or whatever. But it can take decades or even centuries for our bodies to completely decompose into dust, so depending on how long a person has been dead, the reality is that they're going to end up as dust anyway, all of us, right? Unless you die and the Lord returns, perhaps the next day or the next year or whatever. So the total point is that God is not limited by the way our bodies were discarded in relation to his power to recreate a body. Scientific studies on decomposition demonstrate that the process is influenced by numerous factors including temperature, humidity, and the presence of microorganisms. These studies are corroborated by research in taphonomy, the science that studies the processes of decomposition, fossilization, and preservation of organisms after death. They explain how the human body gradually disintegrates into simpler components, eventually becoming part of the earth again in a process that can vary enormously. Simultaneously, the scriptures offer a comforting view on the transience of physical life and the promise of eternal life. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 42-42, Paul speaks about the resurrection of the dead, saying, "So will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable. It will be raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it will be raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it will be raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it will be raised a spiritual body." This passage reflects the Christian belief that although the physical body may perish and return to dust, there is a form of existence that transcends materiality, a spiritual eternal existence promised to all believers. And so the fourth and final question we will address in this video is, how can I decide if cremation is right for me? Now, there are some questions you probably should ask yourself if this is something you are considering, or perhaps someone you know is considering this as a possible option. First and most importantly, what kind of burial, what kind of commemoration do you want people to have when you die? Because if you are in an urn, you can be moved from one place to another. But if you are buried in a grave in a cemetery with a headstone or something, sometimes that can be a place where loved ones will return. Now we know that your body is there and your spirit is gone, but sometimes that gives comfort to loved ones to be able to return to your grave and just have those wonderful memories of you. That's not possible if you choose cremation as an option. But along those same lines, again, do you simply want to have an urn, Or do you want people at the time of your death to have an open casket where they can come and look at you one last time and really say goodbye to you and commemorate the life you had and how you impacted their life? Another thing you might want to consider is, depending on whether you have family traveling from all over the world and such, you want to make it convenient for them to come to a memorial service. Because often if you decide on a traditional burial, everyone who knows you has to make a decision. They have to stop what they're doing and they have to adjust. And maybe within a week, maybe 10 days or more, they have to come and travel so that they can participate in your memorial service. Because your body is decomposing and can only remain in a certain state for so long before going 6 feet under, right? The Bible does not explicitly mention cremation as a method of body disposal after death. So there is no direct prohibition or specific approval of cremation in the scriptures. Burial practices described in the Bible generally involve the burial of bodies. For example, notable figures from the Old Testament such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph were buried. In the New Testament, the body of Jesus Christ was buried in a tomb. The lack of direct reference to cremation in the Bible leads to interpretations based on general Christian principles and ecclesiastical traditions. Some argue that since the body is seen as the temple of the Holy Spirit, 1 Corinthians 6:19-20, it should be treated with honor and respect after death, which would favor traditional burial. However, others argue that since the physical body returns to dust anyway, as you are dust and to dust you shall return, Genesis 3:19, cremation is an acceptable way to accelerate that natural process provided it is done with respect. Some Christian denominations had restrictions on cremation in the past. Based on the belief in the resurrection of the dead, the concern was that cremation might somehow impede the resurrection. However, over time many of these denominations revised their positions, recognizing that God is capable of resurrecting a body regardless of its physical condition after death. The Catholic Church, for example, officially permitted cremation starting in 1963, provided that it is not chosen for reasons that contradict the Christian faith in the resurrection. However, the Church still prefers the burial of bodies or ashes rather than the scattering or storing of ashes in an unsacred manner. Therefore, the decision regarding cremation is often left to individual discernment and personal beliefs within the context of the Christian faith. Many believe that as long as the choice for cremation is made with respect and does not deny the doctrine of the resurrection, it is considered acceptable. Consistency with the Bible in matters of funeral practices, including cremation, should be analyzed more through the general principles and fundamental beliefs of Christianity than by specific instructions or comments from Jesus Christ on the matter. What is most consistent is the dignity with which the body is treated after death and the maintenance of hope in the resurrection. If the decision for cremation is made with respect and honor to the deceased and does not contradict the belief in the resurrection of the body, then it can be seen as a viable option for Christians. The focus should remain on the spiritual significance of death and resurrection, and not necessarily on the method of body disposal. Moreover, it is important. It is important to consider the traditions, teachings, and guidelines of the specific denomination or faith community to which a person belongs, as different groups may have varied interpretations of these issues. In summary, consistency with the Bible in relation to cremation or burial is not based on a direct instruction from Jesus or specific commandments, but rather on how these practices are carried out, respecting Christian principles of dignity, respect for the body, and belief in the resurrection. So my brothers and sisters, I hope the answers to these 4 questions give you clarity. If you are in a place where none of us really wants to talk about death, right? We don't want to think about it, right? But you may be in a place where you're thinking about what kind of plans you want to make in relation to how you are sent off when you die. I hope these 4 questions in this video give you clarity to make a wise decision. See you in the next video. God bless you. Share with your acquaintances and leave your like and comment below your opinion.